you're sitting way back over there, we would like to invite you to come closer. Please do, if you don't mind, please come closer. That would be really nice. Just another 10 seconds. Please come closer, come closer. And we will connect with you more powerfully. Thank you very much indeed. So, my name is Henry Bonsu. I'm a television and radio broadcaster from the UK and Ghana. I've been in the business of trying to translate complex messages into really powerful narratives that people can understand in 2 minutes of television or 45 minutes of radio. And the same principles apply every time. You've got to tell a story with a beginning and a middle and an end in a language that people understand. And the same goes for forests. So this session is in two parts. We're talking about harnessing the communication effect. And why is this important? Well, forests play a critical role in solutions to many global challenges. We've heard this all week. Forests are key to the fight against climate change, and as we here all know, provide clean water, air, habitat, and support biodiversity, fiber, food, and much more. Simply, there is no future without forests. So how can we make this message heard and beyond heard, have people embrace this concept? Today's session on forest communication and education will explore this in more depth. The first part of the session investigates what people in the street think about sustainable forest management, why we need forest communication that inspires hope and action, and attracts new generations of foresters to the sector. That's what you're called, foresters, you see. And how to craft strategies to produce more powerful and impactful communication within and beyond the forest sector. That's the first half. In the second half, we'll provide a snapshot of the status of forest education around the world. Education is largely recognized as a key means to influence the knowledge, skills, and values of citizens to support sustainable development, and early exposure in young children can encourage tomorrow's adults to make more conscious and responsible decisions for a sustainable future. Why is this? Because you cannot educate without communicating, and you have the potential to educate your audience wherever you communicate. Communication and education are inextricably linked. Now, as a broadcast journalist, it's my job to do both of these every day, whether I'm doing a recorded item or a live piece of radio or television, bringing news to audiences, to broad audiences, helping to inform them of the issues of the day, and communicating it in a way they can understand. Sustainable use and management of our forests is critical, and this entire sector here today needs to be in the solutions providing business to ensure future generations have the same opportunities as we do. Are you with me so far? Like you mean it. Are you with me so far? Yes. Yes, we can. Understanding the importance of forests and how they are part of the solution is critical. I would agree with one of my broadcasting heroes, Sir David Attenborough, and he said this: saving our planet is now a communications challenge. This is one reason why I was pleased to learn that there's an entire global network of forest communicators working at local and regional levels and helping to organize events like this. The Regional Forest Communicators Network were first established in Europe almost 20 years ago, and since 2018 there are 6 networks in 5 regions. The networks currently comprise over 500 enthusiastic professionals from both government and private organizations, and they're within the forestry sector, and they came together to share best practice and tools to implement effective communication campaigns on a regional level. I'm pleased to say many of them are here today, and if they're not on this panel, they likely had a hand in putting it together. So kudos to this group for volunteering their time and effort to help address this challenge of how we can, yes, why not? Woo, woo, yeah. Of how we can use communication as a tool to save our planet. And now, to introduce the panel for today, who will share examples of how we can harness the communication effort or effect for this sector, and to help us use communications as a tool to save our planet. There we go. Jennifer, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Henry, so very much. And thank you all for joining us today. I am just thrilled to be talking to you about harnessing the communication effect because it signals how far we have come. It's impressive how communication continues to grow in importance at events such as this. So my hope for today is that each of you are going to leave this session inspired, or at least maybe a little bit intrigued to want to go back and try something different in how you communicate about forests with your general public. And so why does this matter? Because as Henry put it, quite simply, there is no future without forests. We have to better position forests to be part of the solution, to be seen as the solution, to be seen, as we heard yesterday at the Ancient Materials plenary session, as the path to grow the solution. So today we've gathered together communication experts from around the world to share some trends, shifts, and tips with you about how to help the forestry sector reach more people. And this will also include talking about how we leverage our actions, our visuals, our audio, and our messages to be more effective within, and even more importantly, outside of the sector. Oh, yep, there we go. We need to keep pushing boundaries. We need to keep trying new methods. We need consistent messaging and common understanding. And while there are many examples, I have seen them here at this Congress, many examples of great communication about forest, we need more, many, many, many more. Because we have to break through to new audiences. We have to engage. We have to educate, influence, and most importantly, we need to learn together with a very diverse public. And why? Well, let's just take one example. I imagine that if I went section by section here and asked a different person in each section to define sustainable forests or sustainable forest management for me, I would probably get a different answer from each one of you. And so if within the sector we talk to ourselves and we still don't have a common shared definition of terms that we use so regularly, I wonder what people on the street, how they understand those terms, how they would interpret them. So I think it's important for us to maybe just hear it directly from them.
Yo pienso que el bosque debe estar cuidado y bonito.
I think the first thing is to keep people outside the forest.
Es un bosque pues que esté más controlado, que la gente lo cuide, que no haya basuras y que si las hay pues que haya gente contratada para recogerlas, un bosque que no se pueda ensuciar.
غابات مستدامة الحياة. الشجر غابة شجر والشجر بيعطي أكسجين، الأكسجين هو الحياة. بلا غابة ما في حياة.
I think trees, woods. I think my kids they must play under the trees and flowers.
Probably like taking care of a forest, like being eco-friendly with the forest. I'm not really sure.
Cortar poca madera.
นึกถึงการที่คนเราทุกคนช่วยกันไม่ทำลายป่าค่ะ
No lo so.
Eu penso em energia renovável.
Because it provides the shades. Many trees. A lot of trees.
Que estén bien, nos preocupemos por ellos, vamos.
Flowers, grass, trees, and soil.
Lo que se me viene a la mente es un ambiente donde puedo respirar aire puro.
Love it when you bring the consumer into the room. There's always something you can take out from it. And as a communication strategist, I always believe that you ought to start with the consumer first and then look at your messaging and how you craft it towards them. And too often, I think we start with our message. And I think what's so critically important about it is that in consumers' busy, stressful, noisy, cluttered worlds, I mean, we're scrolling on average about 2 to 3 kilometers worth of content on our mobile phones. How are we going to cut through? And, let me just see if that's going to work. There we go. I think the thing that happens is that we get so caught up in what we want to say, are we clear on what's actually being heard? And I love this quote. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has actually taken place in the first instance. And I think so much of our communication efforts actually go to waste, which nobody really wants to know, because imagine all that time and all that investment. And the climate change is no difference. We've known about this issue for 60 years, yet why haven't we managed to solve it? And I think that's exactly the communication challenge that David Attenborough was talking to. And why is this the case? I think it's because we confuse two very different things. On the one hand, information, and there's lots of it at this Congress, lots of important information, but how do we distill it down into powerful communication that's going to cut through? So two very different things: information, giving out, communication, cutting through. So what do we do about it? Today I want to share with you 3 simple pillars, principles, lenses that you can apply to your communication efforts to hopefully make them more powerful. Because great communication, at its simplest, gets people to either think, say, or feel something very different. And I want to share with you some examples on that. So when you think about think, you put the consumer front and center and you go, what are their current perceptions and what is it that we want to shift? Taking a bit out of category, here's one from the alcohol industry. So we know that excessive alcohol consumption is an issue that faces many societies. And you're probably all familiar with these sort of warning labels and sort of the campaigns that are quite sort of fear-driven about, what happens if you drink too much. Then comes along Heineken, who understands they don't want to live in this world. They want to do something different. And so they took a very, very fresh perspective on the matter.
Where are all the gods? Where's the streetwise Hercules to fight the rising odds? Isn't there a white knight upon a fiery steed? Late at night I toss and turn and I dream of what I need. I need a hero. I'm holding up for a hero. Till the end of the night. He's got to be strong. And he's got to be fast. And he's got to be fresh from the fight. I need a hero. I'm holding up for a hero till the morning light. He's gotta be sure and it's gotta be soon. And he's gotta be larger than life. Larger than life.
Big, important, and serious issue, but tackled with such a fresh perspective. I mean, you wanted to start dancing. I mean, I think it's probably the first alcohol or drink responsibly campaign that you wanted to dance to. But I'd also argue it's the one that you will remember. And I think that's really important. And I think what Heineken understood, and I've actually worked with them for over a decade, is that this whole enjoy responsibly or drink responsibly space lives typically in the world of fear. This is what will happen if you drink too much. Whereas actually what they understood is, don't be that guy. And in that way, they were far more motivating. And again, I say a big, important, and serious issue, but yet tackled with such a fresh perspective. Say, so often, communication that you see, and I think you kind of see it in the sector, we tell people exactly what they already know. It's kind of, especially in the sector, a sea of green. So how are you going to add to that conversation? What are you bringing that's new? And that's what you must always ask of your campaigns and communication. Here's a brand that we all know well, Apple, known for their iconic products and design for many, many decades. But then they understood that they needed a new association to add to their brand, to add to their products, that people will associate with the brand in the rise of the anxiety around protection of personal information and data privacy. And so what they did is tackle it, as Apple always do, in such a human, insightful way.
Felix?
Name?
Felix.
Date of birth?
November 5th, 1986.
Tracking current location.
Can I have a taste of your your ice cream?
Here's what you spent last month.
Crumbs from your table. Can I interfere in your crisis? Can you hear those people behind
This will
me?
help with the itching.
Can I have a taste of your ice cream? Can I lick the crumbs from your table? No, mind your own business. Why don't you mind your own business? Why don't you mind your own business?
Such a great piece of communication. And taking a topic that's complex and abstract and scary, and yet making it personal and motivating, and dare I say, even entertaining, because most people want to be entertained. And again, I think what Apple understand is the contested space was the subject matter of data privacy. That's all too prevalent. And actually, what they went in and made it interesting, and they demonstrated in such a wonderful way. And then probably the most important, and it's a soft word, it's a heartfelt word, is what is you want people to feel? What reaction are you really looking for from your communication? Those of you that have heard me speak before know that I use this reference a lot for a number of reasons. It's unbelievably impactful. I think it's like the pinnacle of powerful communication. Not everybody has the budgets of Apple and Heineken, so it is a powerful idea that's executed so simply, but does it in such a powerful way. Have a look at this.
Ndikaitali kujumuri bambe jenka moja kilele ndikare sonsiaba sana na kofnak eja kamoja unungu rumela mibe sendin bayambu mera ngal jenka moja jupi kilomita sana jenka moja jupi juko famfa.
When we're thirsty, we just go and get water. But getting water here means spending the whole day walking. Our mission at Water for Africa is to build sustainable, clean sources of water for villages. We asked Sabre2 to make one last effort.
Wani ngwale nika weno mpingo nija ejaya leye kurmi ngwane ba frambe na kurngao be tuniye tu be jikero.
Koliji mimi nankoji oji.
Siabatou Sané a parcouru les 42 km hier en marchant.
Ces images avaient fait le tour du monde, d'abord le tour des réseaux sociaux.
C'est une manière pour elle de récolter des fonds pour construire des pompes à eau dans son pays.
People have donated so much more than I can ever have imagined.
Yele jamba wanende kane puru bugala be bukana kumbo hana mu yidingol ngani jikamma bukana kolo.
I've watched that about, 200 times, and I still get goosebumps. But what's so powerful about it is that it captured the imagination, the attention, and the heart of everybody. It's universal. I think sometimes we so get caught up in our kind of lens of kind of relevance that we sometimes forget resonance, how we're actually connecting with people, heads and hearts. Again, I think the important shift here was a shift from showing, and I think a lot of the communication in the sector shows lots of things. You see the images of either the cut down fields or the canopies of green, and I think we've got to move into demonstrating. What a powerful demonstration of what a woman has to do to get fresh water. So communication, 3 fundamental questions to ask. Think, what is the current perception and how are we going to go about really shifting that? Say, what conversation are we bringing to this topic? And I think it's really important in this sector because I think there's a lot of similarities and we've got to find what is it that we're going to bring that's new and interesting, especially for a global public. And importantly, feel. And that's quite hard because we do live in science and data, and it's really, really important, and I'm not negating that. But what do we do with it, and how do we make sure that people can connect with it? And I think that's what the panel here today are going to help us look at, hopefully share some tips and some shifts in doing that as experts in the field.
Always hard. I've seen this video several times, but it's always hard to speak afterwards. It's so touching, so emotional. But you will certainly agree with me that policymakers are important communication partners, and let me share with you a couple of observations on how they work and what matters to them. Firstly, to get support for their agenda and to stay in charge, they need to listen and react to a wide range of diverse views and expectations, and in the end come up with solutions widely acceptable. And I think this is also a familiar challenge to forestry. So in the policy process, understanding the stakeholders, the power of stakeholders and the media is key. And let's take the example of climate change and the issue of climate change as an example. And there, scientists actually discovered global warming and have been warning about its severe consequences since. However, the political action around it is very much driven by young people connecting and organizing themselves through the World Wide Web. So for politicians, it matters who is influential, and they closely pay attention to media, particularly also to social media. So if you make an impact on social media, you will not only reach young people, you will certainly be also recognized by politicians and decision makers. Another aspect of policy communication is the need for breaking down complex issues to simple messages. Equality very much needed also in forest communication. But there's the general concern that you might lose technical accuracy when simplifying. Now, Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, you have not understood it well enough. So apparently it can be done. But of course it needs strong focus, and it needs some bravery to cut down to the core of the substance. And I can give you one example of what the UN did with the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And for instance, Goal 15, the original text starts with protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems and so on. And what you see marked here on the screen, this is just the title. So too complex language for broader audiences, and an ordinary person will stop listening after the first line. And this is what the UN communication branch came up with for the very same thing for outreach purposes. Life on land, 3 words, and coming with likewise easy to grasp visual symbol. Even children will understand this. So this just as an example, and it was done for all 17 SDGs.
Why should we target the general public? This is one of the questions that keep popping up when I speak to scientists or to experts. They tell me, I want to reach policymakers. I don't really care about the general public. Or should we? Well, certainly policymakers do care about what voters think. And let's not forget, the general public is made of consumers. And consumers have a very powerful way of influencing. So especially in a times of fake news, I think it is our duty to communicate with the general public. Because if we don't, who will? But how do we communicate with the general public? We need to keep it simple. Here is an example of a photo that I took several years ago in Malaysia in a supermarket. This supermarket produced this green lane to make consumers feel special if they didn't use plastic. Very efficient way of communicating. And for the International Day of Forests, FAO always produces a video spot for the general public. Let's have a look at it.
Wood helps provide millions of people with clean and safe drinking water, cook food, and build shelter. But wood can do even more. Wood can build skyscrapers and replace plastic. With advances in science, wood is changing how we see the world, how we dress, and how we move in more climate-friendly ways. Through nanotechnology, wood can help us heal and find new cures. Wood is even taking us to space. When forests are managed sustainably, wood is a renewable resource. Choose sustainable wood for people and the planet.
So the fact that we used very simple messages gave us the possibility to pitch to the media this video spot. And in fact, this video spot was aired on many international news outlets in many languages, reaching over 1 billion households. And the same video spot was also promoted in the social media channels that we all know that you can see on the screen. But there's one social media channel that is still a little bit underestimated and quite often ignored. TikTok. So why should we not ignore TikTok? Why should we invest a little bit more in producing communication products for TikTok? Very simple. 1-2 billion people use TikTok. And by the end of the year, they estimate 1.5 billion. Another reason, very important target audience for us, is the youth. And if we like it or not, youth takes their news from TikTok nowadays. And also, it's global. It's not just in one country or in one region. It's a global phenomenon. And here again, another example on how we simplified even more the messages for the International Day of Forests for this target audience.
Wait a minute. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Nope. Yep. Nope. Yep. Nope. Yep.
So after we posted it, we got tons and tons of comments, and I just picked a few here. And some of those comments were even a bit provocative, but that actually gave us the opportunity to communicate with our target audience and actually to educate them at the same time. Reuse, reduce, recycle. That's what was our response. Thank you.
All right, so the shift I offer is how we communicate complex science in a better way to the broad public, because science is about more than just explaining. It is about connecting. A 2018 survey by the organization Science Counts showed that the #1 emotion evoked by the word science, put one in your head real quick. What do you think it is? Well, they found that it was hope. And so in order for science to serve as the brand of hope, it has to be understood and it has to be trusted. And there are a lot of things in this world right now to worry about and fear. So I propose that perhaps we pivot away from this constant fear-based communication to more hope-based communication, using science as the basis for that. And I was absolutely thrilled to see this blossom the hope campaign here at the Congress. What a great way to reinforce the message that I was going to share with you. But in order to do this, we have got to start sharing science using different types of mediums for different types of learners. Not everybody learns the same way. Multisensory communication, immersive storytelling techniques, audio, visuals, more than just numbers. Most often, when we communicate science, we're using percentages and statistics. And I work in research and development, and I am terrified of numbers. I am not a numbers person. So I like these kinds of approaches much better. And so they also help us engage a lot more people. So to demonstrate this shift, I'm going to give you 3 simple examples from my agency, the U.S. Forest Service. This first example is from my colleague, Lindsay Rusted. This is from the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, and it is this beautiful illustrative segment, and this is actually real-time water flow data happening in a stream there. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there is a beautiful musical interpretation of the rate of flow happening as well. And what that allows is for us to have visually impaired people still experience the science, making it a more inclusive demonstration. The second product is by my colleague John Shaw, and this is using a tool called the Forest Vegetation Simulator. So imagine you're talking with the general public. They've never seen forest thinning or forest fire. They don't know what it looks like for a forest to recover. Some people in urban areas might not ever have been to a natural forest that has gone through these processes. And we tell them, we constantly tell them, but this tool gives us a way to show them. And finally, art can resonate where numbers cannot. My team regularly uses art products like this one to communicate complex science topics to a broad audience. In this case, it is about how we can do better proactive management for fire risk. And so finally, I'd just like to encourage you all to think about your communication and use more audio, more visuals, more storytelling, because when we do that, we can create more trust and more understanding in the scientific products, specifically forest science products, and hopefully, through that process, create forests as the brand of hope.
Hi, good afternoon. We know the outcomes that we need to achieve. We also know the audience that we need to engage. But how do we best design communication interventions that tap into the skills, interests, and expertise of our audiences? Today, I bring with me experience from the Asia-Pacific region, specifically from the ASEAN, a region rich in biological and forest resources, but also in innovative communication strategies and tools. Let me begin with a local experience, an awareness-raising training on climate change and the vital role of local people. Oftentimes, climate change, its concepts, its drivers, and impacts can often be perceived as conceptual, complex, and convoluted. However, the simple exercise of wrapping a participant in plastic brought to life concepts such as greenhouse gases, increase in temperature. In a related experience, forest classes harnessed the vast traditional knowledge of elders and the active curiosity of kids aged 6 to 10. Having learned from the traditional forest recipes that the elders have eaten since they've been conceptualized into the earth, intergenerational knowledge transfer has always been the tool that they used. And storytelling facilitated that characterization of the ingredients that they used in their forest and native recipes. Having learned from these experiences, we now work with young ASEAN storytellers in the face of the digital era, or the TikTok era, as Maria has mentioned. We work with young ASEAN storytellers in developing immersive stories about ASEAN heritage parks, a platform where the youth can be inspired by forest, and also co-develop and co-create natures with key forest actors. In closing, allow me to emphasize that we do not learn from experience, but rather we learn from reflecting on experience. Our communication interventions should open up spaces that allow our users to think, say, and feel, as what Robert has mentioned earlier. They should be able to reflect on how they can be influential outside our forestry circle. Thank you very much.
Hola, ¿cómo están? You might be wondering why am I speaking in Spanish, my language. But in order to achieve local relevance, this is very important. And we can see this phrase from Nelson Mandela. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. So when we talk to local people, to people in our country, we need to think about this, if it's people from our communities as well. And I'm going to share very simple communication tips. The first one, you need to listen. But this is not only hearing. You really need to pay attention what people are saying to you. And you need to be respectful when you listen. It's not only sitting there looking at your phone. You need to be respectful. Second, you need to know your audience, who you are going to talk to. Have you do some research to know this person? Do you know the values the people have? Please try to know the person you are going to talk to, or if you are going to be in a meeting. And then another aspect that we have been talking here, try to use the same language, the same vocabulary, because words are very powerful. And other aspect that you need to consider is when are you going to use those words and how you are going to use them. And one element that we can use in our communities is to use windows of opportunities. And what does this mean? It means to take advantage of special dates when we can celebrate the forest, when we can call the attention of the children, of the journalists, of the people of the community. Try to think about the National Tree Day, for example, or the International Forest Day. Do something that day and call the attention of people. And the local preferences of social media. We need to know about technology, and for example, in Latin America, where I come from, for adults, Facebook is the main platform. It's not Twitter. For young people, it's Instagram and TikTok. So we need to know those aspects. And finally, it is very important to create coalitions. For example, the Forest Communicators Networks that we represent. Coalitions allow us to be with people that have the same interests, the same values, and the one that raise the voice in the same way that we do. Thank you.
Let's hear it. Microphone on.
네, 마누엘라, 얼, 제니퍼, 마리아, 잉발. 네, 정말로 훌륭하게 해주셨습니다. 감사합니다. 네, 로버트 그리스까지 정말 마스터 클래스와 같은 그런 모습이었던 것 같은데요. 다음 제2 세션으로 넘어가기 전에 시간이 조금 남아있는 것 같습니다.
We need to reflect on what we've just heard. So I'm going to ask a couple of our colleagues here a question. But in the time allowed, I'm going to suggest two people. Think about this. Who've got a burning desire to ask a question or make a comment, a very brief one, that's highly relevant to what they've just seen and heard. Highly relevant, okay? So, if that's you, go up to the microphone, that one there, or that one there, and that one there, and I'll pick you. Think about it and respond, okay? No, you're coming on the next panel. Professor, you cannot talk. Okay, just go and stand there. The lady in the pink, you can stand there, okay? Before we get to you, though, I want to ask Ingvald this. What do you think policy expects from communications as an outcome? Because I was struck by that graphic you showed of all these people, diverse people, probably talking about concepts and sometimes getting bogged down in process. But what does policy expect from communications as an outcome?
Well, I would say, and I would relate this to forest and forest policy, forest-related policies. I think forest politicians would expect that people understand that using forests, utilizing forests, does not harm the climate per se. Quite the opposite. That if forest management, if done well, keeps forests in place, keeps forests vital, provides us with wonderful goods and services, and it secures us the best carbon storage we can imagine. So policy, I think, if it deals with forests and forestry, would wish that people would expect and demand that forests are managed well and not closed down for business. I think that's, in simple terms, what a politician would
But I'm just thinking about, this is a very brief supplementary, the key message you want people to understand about forests as it relates to climate change, the people out there, the key message.
The key message would be that forests managed well help to save the planet. They are good for, this is good for the climate. It helps to store carbon.
Very good. All right. Robert, struck by your presentation at the beginning, love the images. I love the quote from Einstein as well, and I think about that now every time I'm on the radio. What do you want the public to do with this information you've communicated?
I guess the key thing you want communication, I imagine, in this sector, and especially with a global audience, is the first thing is how do you get people to buy into what you're saying? And I think that's that art of distillation and cutting away. You've got to get through that complexity and understand where they're at in their lives and that message. So firstly, buy in. Is your audience going to buy into this message in the first place? And then the second thing is, can they act on it? And I think that's probably where a large part of climate change communication has fallen short. You kind of know this is happening, but what do I do about it? And is my small difference, my small action, actually going to contribute? So is it something that people can firstly buy into, and importantly and tangibly act on?
Where do you think the gap is? Because you clearly imply that there's something getting in the way.
I think that we struggle with, and it's so obvious, but simplicity. Yeah. We are scared of it because we're scared we're not covering all our bases. We're scared that we're putting ourselves out there. We're scared that we're not going to satisfy all our stakeholders. But you know, communication for me, I talk about it as the thin edge of the wedge. The idea is to get the attention is the first thing we have to do, to then get them intrigued and interested and wanting to know more. But so often we go out with kind of the loud hailer and explain everything, and then we've lost people.
You haven't lost Maria. She's keen to respond.
Well, responding actually to complementing what Robert says, because I think for us communicators, the biggest challenge is what also Robert just said, is to kind of get the message across that if we propose a simple message that we know will have an impact, will not be added and added and added. At the end we have 1 kilometer, and making understand that if it's 1 kilometer, nobody will read it. Because that's the challenge. Because they think, okay, I'll just add another word, in any case it will be published, but it will not have an impact. Nobody will read it, or it will not be repeated, it will not travel, it will not be part of the conversation. So I think that's the biggest challenge for all of us here, is knowing that simplicity is the right thing to do.
I agree with you. I mean, I come from a country that voted to leave the European Union 6 years ago. On the one side, the people who said remain involved the Prime Minister, all the parliamentarians, all living previous Prime Ministers, talking about the economy, talk about links with Europe. And you know, the people who said we want to Brexit, you know what their message was? 3 words: take back control. And they won. They blew everybody out of the water. Lady in the pink, yes, your question.
Thank you, Shireen Chambers, Institute of Chartered Foresters, United Kingdom. It may have been partially answered there by Robert and Maria, but all your presentations were fascinating and really sharp and to the point, but it's not rocket science, and we know what you're saying. We know it's truth. We've known this for generations. Why are we getting it wrong?
Thank you, Maureen. Why are we getting it wrong? Jennifer, do you want to respond to that? I see reluctance in your face.
I'm happy to respond to it. I will build on what Maria said. I think a lot of times, many of us represent or work for large institutions, and so it is often, there are many layers between the communicators and the products getting out the door, and a lot of extra pens in hand to continue to add to the things that are created. So I think there isn't a lot of trust in the expertise of the communicators, or at least traditionally there hasn't been, but I see that changing. The fact that we have this session here, there should be a communication session at every single one of these events, and we should be learning from the best practices of everyone. And I think we have seen tremendous shifts in starting to get it right, but bureaucracy often gets in the way.
But Robert?
Maybe I can just add, I mean, the one thing that's very interesting is who are you turning to for that expertise? You know, when Ban Ki-moon first launched the SDGs, he went to the Cannes Advertising Festival, which is a gathering of all the global biggest marketers and advertisers, to ask for their help, to say, take this abstract and complex thing called the SDGs and turn it into a personal and motivating story. And I think, you know, who are we turning to do our communication? And I would say, set aside budget, because it requires budget to pull off the kind of communication that you're seeing here. You know, this isn't just done in 1 minute. These are people it's their expertise and craft. And I'd say, carve out some budget, turn to experts. They can really add significant value.
Very good. Final question, yes.
Thank you so much for all of this insightful information. My question to you is, do you think it would be valuable to have a communication, like, basically like education about it in schools, in degrees where forestry is, you know, taught? Because like such skills are not, well, I didn't take communications, right? It was maybe like 1 or 2 lectures on how to write a brief and that's it, right? So do you think it would be valuable to integrate communication into everyday education for kids and graduates and undergraduates and stuff like that? So
I think Earl needs to respond to that, given your presentation.
Thank you very much for the question. I think there has to be more discussions about forestry outside of the usual subject areas like science and technology. If we can incorporate or mainstream forestry science into other subjects such as language and other aspects of the art or the creatives, I think it will bear more significance.
Tremendous. And Marinella, in your presentation, you talked about achieving local relevance. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, really.
Yes, and adding to what Earl said about including communication in education, I work in a postgrad university in Latin America, and this is a necessity. It's something that students really need to acquire, to know how to communicate science, to know how to do it with different publics, because they have a barrier to transfer the message in different spaces. If they know how to write, they don't know how to speak orally to other people. So I think it's a need, but that's a process that needs to be done in each country, and it's a policy. I mean, it's not something that is only done by a person. It's a movement that needs to be done.
Well said. Put your hands together for our panel. Marinella, Earl, Jennifer, Maria, and Ingvald, and Robert. Thank you very much indeed. And now, from our expert forest communicators, we're going to transition to this discussion. This is part 2. We're going to look at the status of forest education globally, and look at the need for greater investment, innovation, and new approaches to meet the requirements of different stakeholders, especially young people. This is going to be interactive, we hope, as well. We're going to have a keynote from Alexander Buck, International Union of Forest Research Organizations. So, Alexander, could you come up to the podium? And then, coming up, sitting alongside me, we've got Christoph Klein, professor at the University of Göttingen. Put your hands together for him. Magdalena Jovanovic, president of the International Forestry Students Association. Janet Martirez from FAO, Kids to Forest Initiative, Philippines. And Leila Rosa Muadad, forest communicator and student. Show some love to these people, come on. That's what we like to hear. That's what we like to hear, wonderful. So that's our panel. And we're going to have an initial brief keynote from Alexander, who is the Executive Director of UFRO, International Union of Forest Research Organizations. That's going to trigger a discussion here, and then, time allowing, we'll have a couple of questions or comments from you as well. So thank you very much. Alexander, I should tell you a little about UFRO before Alexander starts. It's a global network for science collaboration, and Alexander's got a background in forestry and law, and is a specialist on international forest, environment, and resource policy. Alexander Buck, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody in the room, and a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to the people joining us online, wherever you may be on this planet. It's quite tough, actually, to speak after such a gifted group of communication professionals, but I think, and I hope that you can still stay tuned for that presentation and the subsequent panel discussion. I've been asked to briefly talk about the status of forest education, the challenges, and the need for change. And I'm going to do right that. The only thing I can't find is the thing to advance the
clicker.
Slides.
Maybe someone took it, put it on the seat. Let's have a look.
Here we are. But before I go into the substance of what I'm going to present, I want to very sincerely acknowledge the two authors of the Global Report on Forest Education, Professor Dr. Mika Rekola of the University of Helsinki and Professor Dr. Terry L. Sharrock of Michigan Tech University, and all the partners that have been involved in this Global Forest Education project. It's obviously, it has been the work of the collaborative effort of a large number of individuals and institutions, as I will also mention a little later on in the presentation. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I think you will agree with me that forest education is the primary means of building the knowledge, skills, and shared values that underpin sustainable forest management globally and that help it contribute to achieving broader goals, especially the SDGs. And here, of course, I mentioned, because it's the most closely related one, the SDG number 4, about quality education. Yet in the past few years, international institutions and bodies have repeatedly made the point that forest education continues to be insufficient or is perhaps even deteriorating or outdated. And that is precisely the reason why we have carried out that project and what the ambition has been, and that's a quote from the project document, is to work towards a new education offensive, which we found to be necessary to address these challenges. So what are the challenges? Before I go there, I would want to mention that, the project has been led by 3 international organizations, the FAO, the International Tropical Timber Organization, ITTO, as well as my own organization, IUFRO, and we have been working closely with 9 partners in the regional activities, and you can see their logos on the screen. And very importantly, I want to mention that this work has been very generously funded by the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, so many thanks for that support. So what we did was a series of activities. We started with a very comprehensive literature review. We reviewed no less than 7,000 references in the scientific and gray literature in order to get the broader background for the project. We then carried out a very large online survey, which was completed by more than 2,700 respondents in all regions of the world. It was done in 14 languages, and it has, to my knowledge, been the largest survey on forest education ever carried out at a global scale. And all that was complemented with a series of regional consultations, which were attended by more than 500 participants in the 6 FAO regions. They serve to further deepen and enhance, the findings, the understanding of the findings of our project. And all that culminated in the preparation of a global report that will be published very soon. And now I want to briefly highlight some of the key findings of this project. And I must warn you, there are some challenges ahead, but I think collectively we can address them effectively. And those mainly relate to the 2 critically important aspects of implementing forest education programs. And these are, on the one hand, enrollment, and on the other hand, curricula. When it comes to the enrollment, the picture that was painted by the results of the project is rather heterogeneous, with some programs increasing in some regions and others decreasing in terms of the number of students involved. One of the things that could be observed in all regions, however, is that obviously the sector does have a poor reputation and image regarding forestry and forest-related jobs, and that also negatively impacts on the enrollment levels. Students just find it more attractive to study medicine or law or other jobs and professions, and we are somewhat lagging behind in the forest sector. A very significant finding of the report has been that women and minorities continue to be significantly underrepresented. They find it simply harder or less attractive to get enrolled, especially at university and college levels, as compared to their male and majority colleagues. And finally, the study also revealed, but I think that's not that new, significant financial and economic challenges faced especially by technical and vocational education and training forest programs. So what this means altogether is that in a way the full potential of attracting talent to forestry is not being fully utilized. Let me now move on to the curricula, and I'll start with the primary and secondary level, meaning school children basically. And here a very important finding is that forest education is lacking in both the primary and secondary curricula. Forest-related subjects are hardly included in these curricula as standalone subjects and are also very insufficiently included or addressed as part of other subjects of these curricula. The professionals and teachers also found that, access to teaching and learning resources is quite limited. It's quite hard for them to find those learning resources, the textbooks and so on. And another important finding is that outdoor learning and real-world examples of forests are also lacking. It's really important to get the kids out into the forests. So what that means is that the opportunities to stimulate the youth's interest in continuing their learning about forest-related topics are being missed. So if you now look at the university level and the tertiary, the university level education and the technical and vocational education and training, same story. We found that there are significant educational gaps in terms of topical coverage, while biophysical topics such as silviculture or forest management, planning and inventory tend to be well covered actually in all regions of the world, especially social issues, and more particularly issues related to traditional and indigenous forest-related knowledge, as well as cultural values, are insufficiently covered. That is not a new finding, but it is something that became very apparent once more in this global survey. And we learned earlier about, it was actually a good question that was asked in the communicator session about generic competencies, and communication, I would say, is one of those competencies. And here our report found that while there have been some improvements in instilling students with these generic competencies, the levels are still insufficient. And similar to schools, opportunities for out-of-university learning, but also work experiences continue to be limited actually in all regions of the world. So what that means, unfortunately, is that the graduates are moderately prepared to enter the workforce. So let me now give some of the more generic recommendations of this work. First, those relate to content and material, and this is kind of the flip side of the findings that I've just presented. And here it is obviously important to include more forest-related topics in primary and secondary curricula. It was also found that actually there is a need to initiate a dialogue on what constitutes the essence of forest curricula around the globe, and the authors therefore suggested the creation of a forest education global core curriculum. And another important finding, it's really important to make access to learning materials easier. And here I want to refer to one of the outputs of the project called Forestry. Forestry is a global internet gateway to forest education resources. It exists as a prototype. Unfortunately, we have not yet found the resources to make this fully operational. So if somebody is interested in supporting that piece of work, please do not hesitate to let me know. The second cluster of recommendations relates to teaching and learning opportunities. And here, once more, it is important to make better use of digital learning tools. And here I would like to mention briefly another output of the project, which is an online e-learning course on legal and sustainable supply chains, which has been established by a partner in this project, the ITTO. And I all encourage you, this is online, and I all encourage you to check it out. Similar to what has been mentioned earlier, it is important to increase opportunities for outdoor and field learning, but also to improve the teachers' education and to further develop youth activities and work experiences through part-time work and internships and similar things. And then the social dimension. There are several aspects where we felt that the social dimension of forest education globally needs improvement. First, there is a need to increase stakeholder involvement in the curricular development. You know, curricula need to be dynamic and respond also to how the overall profession and the requirements on forests develop, and therefore it's so important to do this together with the stakeholders. It's also important to increase outdoor activities, as I've already mentioned, and workplace learning. How should students actually meet the expectations of the workplace if they haven't had opportunities to test the waters before they graduate? That is really a very significant shortcoming. And then once more, this very significant finding of the report that really there is a problem in terms of coverage of social and cultural issues in forestry curricula, and that also we need to do better in tackling the challenges for gender, race, and ethnicity in terms of the enrollment in forest education. I'm already slightly over time, but very quickly, I have been asked to also give, as a basis for the panel, some recommendations for specific actors that were presented in the report. First, national governments. I'll start with something very obvious, and that is that there is really a need to include forest education into strategies and plans to implement the SDGs and other relevant goals. And there are big programs, for example, also in the UNESCO on education for sustainable development. Also, policymakers need to make it easier for education institutions and schools to provide learning opportunities in the forest, to really take the kids out into the forest and make them hug the trees and see the mushrooms themselves. There is also obviously a need to address the shortcomings in the curricula and the enrollment challenges, as I've mentioned earlier, and to promote and incentivize stakeholder involvement for curricular development, outdoor activities, and workplace learning. Of course, the bulk of the recommendations relates to the education authorities and institutions themselves. And here, as I've already mentioned, there is a need to revise curricula to really better reflect the modern understanding of the values and uses of forests and the related career opportunities. Once more, there's a need to support the enrollment of women and racial or ethnic minorities in forestry curricula, and to increase students' direct exposure to the forest and the trees, and to develop work experience programs, as well as to improve teachers' education. And that is an interesting finding, actually, nothing new, but what we, I think, all know is that, especially at university level, the teachers, they know a lot about the substance they teach, but oftentimes the pedagogical skills are missing. Nobody ever told them how to do the teaching, and that is a very significant finding. And as I've mentioned before, there are a number of digital tools available or have the potential to be fully developed, and we do not yet fully utilize that potential. And last slide, international organizations. So what can the FAO, UFRO, ITTO, and other international organizations do? I think it's really important, and that brings us back to communication, to raise awareness of decision makers, the public at large, and also the donors, the funding partners, of the importance of forest education. That's simple. Obviously, there is a need to support capacity building of forest educations, institutions and programs, especially in the Global South. There's an opportunity, but also a need to support easy access to learning materials through scalable delivery systems such as the Forestry that I've mentioned before. And also we can support international global initiatives, stakeholder engagement, and partnerships in forest education. And here I'm glad to communicate that the Collaborative Partnership on Forest, the CPF, has recently agreed to initiate a new joint initiative on that very topic of forest education. Here you do have the CPF logo. And all that I've told you now is actually included in the Global Assessment of Forest Education report in much more detail, We were working very hard to get it ready by the time of this meeting, but unfortunately, we did not make it. A few days or weeks are still needed, so therefore I ask you to please stay tuned for the release of that report that will happen very soon. It will be published in the FAO Forest Working Papers number 30, so please stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I allowed you to stray over your time because there was a lot of good content in there, and I wanted to feed the panel. They, I think, were making copious notes, and they, I think, want to chew over some of what you've said and maybe bite deeply into some parts of it. Well, let's see. I'll continue the metaphor if you like. Now, we have on the panel just a little bit more detail. We have a couple of educators and a couple of students. My first educator on my immediate right, Janet Martinez, so FAO Kids to Forest Initiative Philippines. So, Janet, you're leading the 11-year-old Kids to Forest program, so a lot of that stuff was relevant to you right there. And then on your immediate right, so on your left, we have Leila Rosa Muawad, forest communicator. You're laughing. I hate when I get a name wrong because I speak a couple of languages and I should do better. Leila, give me the name. Yes! Okay. Thank you very much for that, Leila. So, currently pursuing your master's degree in forestry at the Lebanese University, and I'm delighted to see that you were selected as a young champion for nature and forests, which is great. Okay, you can applaud her if you like, which is fantastic. Hello, student next to you, Magdalena Jovanovic. Magdalena's an undergraduate studying forestry at the University of Belgrade, and she's president of the International Forestry Students Association. We are honored, Madam President. Fantastic, which is great stuff, yeah. Which is tremendous. And then Professor Christoph Klein, University of Göttingen. So Professor of Forest Inventory and Remote Sensing at the University Göttingen since 2002. He's repeatedly been a consultant to FAO for the past 30 or so years, and he's got a huge amount of knowledge in this area. Okay, so I want to find out from you just briefly, first of all, your thoughts, in response to what we heard from Alexander there, quite a few recommendations. I mean, things are not looking good as they stand. I think, Alexander, you would agree with me on that. But Janet, your thoughts, which recommendations resonated most with you?
Yes, thank you, Alexander, for that research. Now we have statistics. I absolutely agree to your findings that we have forest education is really lacking in the primary and secondary levels. I think this is one of the reasons why also there's a lower degree of appreciation of forests, even as an option for college, as a profession, and more so even as a discussion point or an agenda. And if there is any attention being given to that in classrooms, even faculty members or teachers at the primary and secondary level have very limited knowledge, capacity to really correctly interpret things. So I think that's the reason why we're also doing the Kids to Forest, which is our NGO brings students and out-of-school youth right into the forests because it's an additional methodology of making or giving awareness to and appreciation to students on what benefits the forests can give.
And Janet, I'm really interested in what you said. So you're taking them into the forest. What impact does the forest and being there have on them?
Oh, this is a great experience because kids become more aware of what they benefit from the forests, and they bring these feelings and attitudes, realizations back in their homes. And you can see now, even in their social media, they are now posting environmental images, environmental advocacy.
Tremendous. And so out of all the recommendations Alexander laid out for us, which is the one that makes you think, yes, this is something I can work with?
I would suggest really to give more attention and give more percentage to outdoor activities. However, Alexander, per our experience, it really takes some funds to do that. and a very careful selection of students, out of school youth, and very careful timing as well. You know, this pandemic effect affected us a lot. It also changed the landscape of the Kids to Forest program.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Janet. Leila, what about you? I mean, you are paying close attention, as you would, given that you're an active member of the Forest Communicators Network and you're a young champion for nature and forests.
Okay, is this on? Right.
Yes.
So to reach real improvements in this sector, I believe not a single recommendation is enough by itself. So we've been needing collaboration and multiple approaches in different places and different times. And having listened to the first part of the session and to the outstanding panelists, I truly believe that communication is the mother of all the solutions. And one of our trainers today just said that communication allows us to be actional instead of being reactional. And this is true, because to connect students back to nature and to inspire hope and a sense of ownership and to raise generations of change makers, focusing on the social aspects within and beyond the forestry sector. I mean, and also speaking the language of the people, as Marilena was saying previously, and also listening to what these people have to say is just the way to go.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this as well as a supplementary, Leila. Alexander talked about there being poor representation of women and ethnic or racialized minorities. What attracted you to this area where you are rare, a rare species?
We definitely are a rare species. Well, back in time, like, it's been dominated by males, but also in my country, Lebanon, people are born as nature lovers. This is something that we earn from our ancestors and from our families. But if we choose to go into the sector and get professional education, it's not something that's so easy to pursue, because in Lebanon, none of the private universities, and these are universities that rank top in the Arab region and worldwide as well, offer forestry courses or programs. It is only in the only public university, which is the Lebanese university where I study, that you can actually study agriculture, engineering, and then get your master's in forestry. So this is something very weird, because having people that are really aware of the importance of their forests and actually doing a lot of actions on the ground with NGOs and international organizations, but not being able to get the expertise and professional higher education levels is a really big problem. So what inspired me is just, I feel so connected to nature, and I truly believe that we need to know more about this topic to be able to spread awareness about it and really raise generations of change makers.
Good. Thank you very much indeed for that, Leila. So you're pursuing your master's degree in forestry. Magdalena, our president, is an undergraduate at the University of Belgrade. You are blazing a trail, which is great to see. So one, you're also underrepresented as a woman, and so I want to know why you, as a rare species in this environment, decided, I want to get into it. Was it the same reasons as Leila, or was it different reasons? And two, any recommendations from Alexander that you thought, yes, this is something that we could work with and we could turn into reality?
Thank you. Is it working? Great.
Yeah.
So the reason I chose this was because I actually grew up surrounded by forests and a few mountains, and for me, being in nature is completely natural, and I wanted to continue that. And actually, I hope that more and more people will find this the reason to enter the forestry sector instead of some other reasons, because if we look for meaning through our work, if we look to invest our time sustainably, I think this is how the forestry sector is going to advance. And actually that is where my recommendation kind of connects, which is something that really resonated with me was to introduce forestry-related studies early on in primary and secondary education, because this is really how we can connect young people and children to forestry and to nature itself. And it's something that was already mentioned in the keynote, that the perception of forestry is quite bad. Simply, people no longer see forestry as something sustainable, and they want to shift towards environmental studies or conservation. But it's actually something that we are doing in the forestry sector. It is just not known, and it's not perceived like that through society. And when is a better time to start introducing this to people than at childhood? So this is why I chose this recommendation. But I completely agree with Leila that it's not only one recommendation, but all of them that are needed.
Yeah, do you find that you have had negative responses as a young woman in forestry, or do you think things are changing?
I have had negative responses in relation. I have had negative responses in relation to my gender, but also through my profession. And I've been told that I'm in the wrong sector. If I advocate for a more environmental approach to forestry, then I've been told, oh, you're in the wrong sector. This is not what forestry is about. And I completely disagree, because forestry can be about so many things. We can use forests, but we can also preserve forests. It's not just one thing.
Well, okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm hoping that if you were an undergraduate at the University of Göttingen, Christoph would make sure that you got a better reception and that nobody would say those kind of things to you. So Christoph, you can react to what some of our colleagues have said, and also your thoughts maybe on the recommendations, or one or two key ones, that Alexander made in his initial keynote.
Thank you very much, Henry. And thank you that eventually I'm allowed to talk.
Wow.
Let me distinguish two lines of education.
Bring your microphone slightly closer.
Let me distinguish two lines of education, and that is on the one line, the primary and secondary school education, which is not my field, and then I will come to the academic education, which is more my field. I find it so important to have this elements of forestry within primary and secondary education. And I liked very much when Alexander mentioned these generic competences. And for me, that would be something like sustainably thinking, long-term thinking, multifunctionality thinking, and also thinking in terms of dependence on nature. This is what makes forest management and forestry. So this is what I would see as a task for secondary and primary schools. But if I follow the discussion in my country, in Germany, I do not hear that as a topic for the school children education. I hear more often that the kids, when they come from school, should be in the position to fill out their tax declaration form. And that is the complaint, that they are not learning about that. Yeah. But these generic competences that have been addressed are, I think, very, very important. But when it comes then to the academic education, I wouldn't see it as negatively as it sounded sometimes in Alexander's presentation, of course, because I'm part of the teaching system. I need to defend it somehow. But what I see is a development a little bit away from the very unique features of what forestry is. And I would say, very simply say that the unique feature is that we are not only dealing with forest, but that we are mainly dealing with people and with the interface between forest and people. I mean, when it comes to forests and forest ecology, many ecologists and biologists are probably better than we are. But when it comes to the influence that people have on forest and the interaction between people and forest, this is what is our unique selling point. And it makes me really nervous when I see some colleagues who come from the ecology side, that they are not leaving their ecological playground and that they are not willing to deal with people. I understand that because it makes it so complex. I mean, my field is forest information, and that's why I'm very much interested in this communication issue. Forest inventory and remote sensing. We are generating all the data that hopefully someone will use for decision making. And it took me some decades and growing of gray hair to understand that generating the information is one thing, but we need to better understand
how we make the decision makers use the information. And we need to better understand the decision makers. And that is not only communication, that is trying to get into a completely different field and try to understand how they are thinking. And then we also understand why very frequently they just ignore our scientific evidence. Yep. And this is something that I do not have a clue to that, but I'm noticing that, and it makes me a little bit nervous.
It kind of reminds me of the film with DiCaprio, Don't Look Up. Do you see that film? They just ignored and ignored, and in the end, you saw what happened to the world. I'm just wondering then, Leila and Magdalena, you've got two educators here, and do you have any questions for them that you want to pose to them, that you want to challenge them in any way? Do you want to go first, Leila?
Sure. Just a second. This is kind of hard to manage, you know, the mic. So we've seen in the recommendations and the challenges that many people are facing problems with the curriculum, and they classify it as not engaging enough. It's rather theoretical and, you know, outdated and usually inaccessible to all equally. So what, in your opinion, as educators, is stopping you and the educational institutions from developing curricula that actually promote outdoor learning, hands-on experience, that are inclusive, accessible, have technology, and include other social aspects of forestry?
Now, either of you could answer this. Do you want to, Christoph, or Janet, do you want to? Maybe both of you, briefly, come.
Okay, if I got the question right, I can only talk about my experience in my field, and I know this is not the favorite field of most of the forestry students. The contrary might even be true. I heard today for the second time that forestry people are afraid of numbers and statistics, and they don't like it. But this is our life, and we try to really make our students enthusiastic about that and make clear to them that it's important to look at numbers, to look at figures, and to understand what the statistics mean. And we have a number of offers to our students. We have video clips, we have practical exercises, we have workshops abroad, and try to get the students also involved into international conferences. So we try to enlarge our portfolio of teaching instruments. But then, at the same time, everything depends also on the students, how they accept that. Yeah. And if there is simply no interest in the field that I'm teaching, it's very difficult to make the students enthusiastic. Okay. So I can assure you we do our best.
Janet, anything to add about that on the younger people?
For the primary and secondary and even the pre-primary students, outdoor activities are really fun. But the difficulty comes in the form of how we deliver these methodologies in terms of giving attention to how fragile the minds and the physical bodies of children are, and also adjusting the elements of the topics as to the age level. Okay. So we're an NGO, and we're trying to also push the government to take a look at really including activities or subject matters in the curriculum. And I hope the government will listen to us this time.
Okay. Magdalena, do you want to add something?
I can add from the student perspective, I think the methodology, the form of teaching is really important if it is engaging, if it is creative, innovative, because I think oftentimes teachers have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, but the way they convey that to us can be a lot different, and that is something that is also from the student perspective really important. So I think having some sort of training for professors how to really efficiently convey this knowledge and experience would be really beneficial for both teachers and recipients of education.
I'm just watching to see if Christoph's face is bristling, but it's not. He accepts the need to go back to college, which is good. We've got about 5 minutes left before we have to get out of this room. So if you have a thought or a question, let me know straight away, and then you can go to one of the microphones. If not, we'll discuss. There are one or two more things to add up here. Oh, yes, lady over there, yes? Hello, what's your name? Who are you?
Thank you. My name is Nerio Lele from Kenya, and I'm a forest ecologist at Kenya Forest Research Institute with research interests in areas of forest recovery, management of invasive species, and forest grazing. Yeah, I would wish to thank you for the thrilling presentations on the contemporary methods of communication to the public and forestry education. However, I have a concern on the access to relevant academic and research content and material, as was mentioned in the keynote speech. Like many other research institutions, scientists are under pressure in our institute to publish in high-impact journals. However, to do so, it's very critical that scientists are able to access important databases, for example, Scopus and Web of Science. Unfortunately, most of the developing countries, including Kenya, we are not able to access such databases due to high subscription costs. As a global environmental sector professionals in this room, it's my appeal and a request, if there is a way you can help us, young scientists and research institutions in our countries to access these important databases so that we also get recognized globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was a lady with a hand up there. Was it you? Yes, please. Well, let's take this one more. I mean, that was an appeal from, is it Merela? That was an appeal from you. Okay, yes?
Something quick. I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to invite you to the, encourage you to come to the exhibition booth of FAO, because we are trying to explore new ways to engage with kids. And we have a beta version of a forest kids game. So it is a digital tool to engage with kids and inspire them and educate them about the importance of forests and forestry. Yeah, of course, it's better.
Where is that happening?
It's at the FAO exhibition booth in the exhibition area.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you very much. And Magdalena, as the president of the International Forestry Students Association, what can you say to our sister from Kenya? Because she was reaching out. And as her president, I'm asking you to do something.
Actually, we have already spoken before and exchanged contact information. So.
All right, well, good answer. Christophe? Yeah. What can you say? Because our colleague here, she's at university. Is it in Kenya, you said, yes? And lack of resources and people having, professors under pressure to publish in high-impact journals, etc.
You might not believe me, but we are in a very similar situation. I, from University of Göttingen, do not have access anymore to about 60% of our journals, because it's simply so expensive that the university does not want anymore to engage in subscriptions, as you said. And I know that the negotiations are ongoing. I am not very well informed what is the outcome, and it's a little bit embarrassing to say, but I need to contact my friends in Switzerland or at the Max Planck Institute when I want to have some of the publications, because I have no access. This is a problem that we need to overcome, and it's a sort of paradox thing, because we scientists are publishing there, we scientists are doing the reviews, but then the benefit, the profit is made by some few companies, and they are now playing this
All
game.
right. Thank you very much. We've got 2 minutes left, so your question must be really brief, and the response from whoever I select has to be even briefer. Yes.
Not a question, it's an appeal.
Okay, yes.
My name is Mila Alvarez, I'm with the US Forest Service. It broke my heart to listen on the stage that in 2022 there are still young women in our profession saying that they are not wanted. My appeal is all the men in this room to become our advocates. It's about time. It's about time that women stop talking and men start talking with us and for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for your contribution. Janet, you really felt what she said there, yeah? Thank you very much indeed to our panel. Janet Martirez, Leila Rosa Muad, Alexander Buck sitting down there, Christoph Klein, and Magdalena Jovanovic. That's been your panel. That's been this section on communication and education. You've been wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, and look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.